Okay, so in this video I'm going to be talking you through the context that you need to know about for Taxi Tehran. This is really useful to be knowing about. First of all, it's one of the core areas that you need to focus on for the film, but it's also going to help you understand some of the issues that the film is addressing in the narrative of the film, or say narrative, like what some of the characters are representing basically. So for context, for the purpose of this video, we're going to be looking at the political, social and institutional context within Taxi Tehran. Just as a quick little reminder, there are 3 areas of study that we need to focus on for section A of component 2 for EDUQAS A-level film studies, which are these 3 things that you can see on the screen right now. The first one being the key elements of film form. So that's your cinematography, your mise en scène, editing and sound. How those different elements can be used to create meaning and generate spectator response. So things like maybe representations, for example. And then finally, how the context of the film impacted on the production of the film, what it's trying to say, etc, etc, etc. So for context, we're going to be looking at things like political, social, historical, institutional, cultural, things like that. Context is something that the exam board do like to use for section A of component 2. So you can see here, these are all these are 4 questions from the last 4 exams from 2020 to 2023, and you can see here that each one of those years has a question that is in some way, shape or form related to context. So I think you could certainly say it's probable, not definite, but probable that you're going to get a question that is in some way related to the context of the film. So you can see there in 2020, you had how far do each of the films you have studied represent key characters in ways that challenge audiences' expectations. Then in 2021, you had social and cultural contextual studies are important when attempting to understand the film. Discuss this statement with reference to examples from the 2 films you studied. 2022, discussed how the 2 films you have studied explore the political and social context of their settings. And then finally in 2023, discuss how 1 or 2 contextual factors have influenced the aesthetic of the film. Each of the films you have studied. That for me is a dream question. You know, that'd be an amazing question to get or something like that. So that one, that you got a combination of both context and aesthetic. Okay, so the first thing we need to be looking at is the politics in Iran. This is something that is quite similar to what we need to look at for Mustang. So there will be some stuff that there is sort of some overlap with the 2 films, but I think there's probably a few little bits that can be extended upon as well. So first we need to look at is how free of a country Iran is. And according to the Freedom House Index, you would probably be safe to say it is not a very free country. Or certainly the civilians who live there aren't free. The Freedom House Index gave it a 12 out of 100, which I think in comparison to Turkey, for Mustang, I think Turkey was 30, I think, and the UK is 93. So you can see there you've got 4 out of 40 for political rights and 8 out of 60 for civil liberties. Last year as well, or in 2022, sorry, it had 14. So it's actually gone down in a year. There's probably a few reasons for that. I think some of them will probably be covered in the video. So, in terms of how Iran is ran or governed, Iran is what's called a theocratic dictatorship. So what does that basically mean? A theocracy is defined as a government of state by immediate divine guidance or by officials who are regarded as divinely guided. So it's the idea that the rule of law is heavily influenced by religion, particularly Islam, because the country is the Islamic Republic of Iran. It's also a dictatorship as well, which a dictatorship is similar in a way to places like North Korea, for example. It's where one country has one absolute single ruler. In this case, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He is the supreme leader of Iran. There is a significant suppression of any attempt to, rise up against the Iranian regime or any sort of political unrest. It is, for all intents and purposes, a dictatorship where civil liberties essentially don't exist, really. There is very few political rights. There is often, protests that are quashed or certainly, what's I'm looking for? Yeah, I think quash is probably the right word, to be honest. Arrests are made by activists, even lawyers who attempt to, represent political activists who are in prison have been jailed, which again is something that is addressed in Taxi Tehran through the character of she's a real person, through Nasrin Sotoudeh, who is a human rights activist who is in the film as well. So there are few political rights in Iran. There is also a staggeringly high number of executions as well, especially for people who are maybe political activists, for example. And again, this is something that is discussed in the opening sequence of Taxi Tehran, where you've got these two characters here who are discussing, to what extent capital punishment actually works. So you've got a couple of stats that are quite useful. Iran has generally been second only to China in the number of executions. Convicts can be executed for offences other than murder, such as drug trafficking, or for crimes committed when they were much younger. But again, that all comes back to the idea of just a complete lack of political rights or civil liberties as well. There you go. So this is Nasrin Sotoudeh. She is a character in the film. She's playing, much like Jafar Panahi, she is playing herself. She is a human rights lawyer, and she is someone who regularly represents political activists, political prisoners, people who have been imprisoned by the regime for speaking out against the regime. And she's been sentenced to 33 years in prison for what she's done, and 148 lashes, which is one of the harshest punishments that can be issued in Iran. So 33 years in prison and 148 lashes for the fact that she is a lawyer and she's willing to represent political activists. So she is in prison right now. But then she did go on hunger strike and was temporarily released, but I'm pretty sure she's back in prison now. But yeah, she plays a version of herself in the film. Film censorship is also not just film censorship, but media censorship and art censorship is something that is quite significant in Iran. There is a certain irony in the fact that most of the films that are, very acclaimed critically, including works from Jafar Panahi, end up getting banned. Particularly ones that stand out or attempt to speak out against the Iranian regime. The Ministry of Culture and Islamic Guidance, which is this logo here, they can also enforce cuts, ban films. This film here, Gav, or The Cow, was the first one of the first films, or certainly the earliest films, to be banned by the Iranian government for its depiction of Iran as very rural. So this is one of the very, very early films, but again, very, very highly critically acclaimed. But it was banned by the Iranian regime. It was banned due to the fact that the way it represented Iran was poverty-stricken, very rural, and very, very harsh environment, and they didn't like that particular representation. So there are a series of very strict rules that films must follow in order to be released in Iran. And again, this is something that the film tackles, particularly through the character of Hannah. So films made and set in Iran, they cannot have negative representations of Iran or Iranian culture, nor can you have negative representations of Islam. No contact between men and women. Avoiding discussions about politics or economic issues, and avoiding use of drugs, alcohol, violence. You could also put crime in general in there as well, but you'd lump that in with negative representations of Iran. There are more rules than this, and a lot of the time, whether a film gets banned or censored or not can be down to specific individual aspects of the film, but as a general rule of thumb, these are some of the things that Iranian culture or Iranian authorities say that films need to avoid. But a lot of it, like I said, is down to the individual films. But Taxi Tehran, again, it's one of the subjects that it touches upon is the fact is film censorship, basically. This is something I have spoken about in a previous video. Cyanamide. So cyanamide is a term, really good term to use, perfect for talking about Taxi Tehran, because this is one of the things that he was accused of doing, which is where it's a film or any piece of media, so it could be a piece of art or a TV program, whatever, that presents a dark image of Iran. So films that do this are accused of committing cyanamide. This is one of the things that the character of Hannah touches upon when she's given a homework assignment by her teacher to go out and make a film, or make a film that could be distributed. And while she's shooting her film, which is basically meant to be some sort of documentary thing, she ends up accidentally filming a boy who steals some money. And then she realises that will now make her film completely, unable to be distributed, because it creates a negative representation of Iran, because it shows someone committing a crime. So again, it talks about, it's one of the things that the film does address, and Panahi does try and challenge that in a way. So gender issues is another massive thing that we need to be focusing on. Much like the area of Turkey that we focused on, there is a staggering amount of gender inequality in Iran. There are very harsh rules that are enforced only on women, so things like dresses and personal appearances. Any women who are accused of violating these rules can be subject to arrest or fines in some cases, which will lead us on to a case that we need to look at a little bit later on as well. Women do also not enjoy equal rights in divorce and child custody disputes as well. And again, this is something that the film focuses on. In this scene here that we'll look in a bit more detail, we've got these two characters of a husband and wife. The husband has been knocked off his bike and is worried that he is dying. But he realises that because he thinks he's going to die, he doesn't have a will set up. So he knows that he has got to record a video on his phone whilst he is dying, to record a will that states that all of his wealth and all of his possessions will go to his wife, because otherwise, if there is no will in place, the money will automatically go to his brother because he's a man rather than a woman. So again, this is one of the things that the film does address. Gender gap index, which we looked at for Mustang as well. Iran is even lower than Turkey. It's 143rd out of 146. So that is very, 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 very low. Again, these are really good stats to use for any essay question on what's I'm looking for? Context. 23.5% of married Iranian women have been affected by domestic violence since their marriage, and 72.3% of Iranian women say they continue to face social, mental and educational violence. That's a staggeringly high amount. But again, there's some useful stats to use in essays. Now, this is a really useful case study to look at as well. This is quite recent, so you might, well, it was 2022, I think this took place. So you might have seen this in the news. So this here is Mahsa Amini. She was a 22-year-old Iranian woman. She was arrested by morality police by the allegations were that she was either not wearing a headscarf or wasn't wearing a headscarf properly. And the rules that I spoke about in this section, in this slide here, is that women have to have their heads covered with a hijab or headscarf. So she was arrested by morality police, and she died in custody. Now, the official report by the police claims that she had a heart attack, but there are unverified reports that she had been beaten with batons while she was in custody. Now, what that led to was huge protests, not just across Iran, but all over the world as well. There were marches in a lot of European cities. I think there was some in London. Definitely some in places like Paris and Berlin, places like that, where women ripped off their headscarves and burnt them in solidarity. So it was quite a significant moment in Iran where women were protesting, for their basic, equality and civil liberties. There was videos of women cutting their hair in protest as well. People even shouting "death to the dictator" as well. So there was huge civil unrest based on her alleged murder. But obviously it did spark riots, and there were allegedly 537 people and 68 minors have been killed by security forces due to the protests. That's 537 people and 68 minors. That's again a lot. There is footage of live ammunition being fired. Or there is denials from the security forces. These are two significant people who were killed in the midst of the riots. So this one here is, again, if I get these pronunciations wrong, I apologise. Nika Shakarami. She was 16 years old. She went missing. Allegedly, she told a friend that she was being chased by police on the phone, and her body was found at the bottom of a building. And the report was that she fell from the building, apparently. Although her family have allegedly been made to speak out against Nika. There is a video of her uncle speaking out against the protest, but with apparently someone off camera saying "say it, you scumbag." So there's allegations that he was coerced into saying those things, but there are loads of examples of other protesters who have been killed after the unrest. You've got these two here as well, Hadiz Najafi, 22, and Serena Esmailzadeh, again 16 years old, for being involved in the protests. But again, these are issues that are raised in Taxi Tehran as well. So again, it's got quite a lot in common with Mustang with regards to the lack of, equality in terms of gender. So I have spoken about this as well on one of the videos for, I think it was the introduction to Taxi Tehran video. What the film is attempting to do is, like it says here, generate empathy. Now again, this all comes down from the idea that it's unlikely that you will have that much contextual knowledge about some of the issues that are affecting Iranian society, and that is the point of Taxi Tehran. It wants to present you with these issues so that you become aware of them, so that you can empathise with these people. You know, it might be likely that you have absolutely no understanding of these cultures. So I'm not going to bother going through all this quote again because I've done it on a previous video. So if you want to go back and look at that one, it's on the introduction to Taxi Tehran video. But this is really important, right? The movies are like a machine that generates empathy. That is the entire point of the film. It's meant to make you aware of these issues. You know, it's making you aware of the fact that there is such a huge gap in in genders in Iran. The fact that women are regularly sort of subjected to violence, subject to staggering inequalities, but also the basic, you know, civil liberties of things like freedom of expression, free speech, the right to a fair political system. So this idea of generating empathy is so important for Taxi Tehran because that is literally the entire point of the film. There's a little bit of institutional context as well, but I'm not going to bother going through a lot of this too much because again I did this on the introduction to Jafar Panahi video that I have done. But from institutional context, the key thing really that is useful to talk about is the fact that Panahi was banned from making films when he made Taxi Tehran. His films regularly speak out against the regime, or the Iranian regime, this bit here, and because of that, he's been banned from making films. And he was also under house arrest for a time as well. So he is someone who is you'd probably say he's an activist filmmaker. You know, someone who really wants to use his platform as an international filmmaker to make a point, to be informative, to be highlighting these basic lack of liberties that are affecting the Iranian population. So again, I'm not going to bother going over that too much, but context, you could, in theory, talk about institutional context as well. Right, that's basically it for the context for Taxi Tehran. I think, for me, the gender issues, again, are so important in the film. But, as is all this stuff as well, I think with Taxi Tehran, there is a much wider scope of issues that you could talk about that the film tries to address, because it does address quite a lot. It addresses capital punishment, it addresses human rights, it addresses gender inequality, it addresses restrictions on freedom of expression, it addresses the exposure to non-Iranian culture, restrictions on things like foreign imports, things like that. It discusses religion. So there is so much you could talk about. Whereas for Mustang, there are things you could talk about, but the big one is going to be gender, really. I think that's all the main one. So there is a much wider scope of things you can discuss in Taxi Tehran. I'd recommend doing a bit more reading on this stuff as well, the Mahsa Amini protests, because it is sort of an ongoing thing. It's not really something, I mean, it has to some extent been quashed by the Iranian government, but it's certainly something that is an ongoing, ongoing thing, I suppose is what I'm looking for. So it's worth reading up on that, because I'm sure there'll probably be further developments on this between now and the time you sit your exam. But if you've got any, I'd recommend as well going through the PowerPoint or going through the video and pausing it at certain moments to make notes of the statistics because they're really useful to have a look at. But that is pretty much it, I think. If you've got any questions you want to ask, send me or Rob an email, come and see us. Other than that, I'll catch you next time.